And so this raises, in my mind, a little suspicion. Maybe I'll see if anybody can guess what I'm driving out about this first part of the sutta. Something seemed a little bit suspicious about, let's say, its historical authenticity.
I have wondered how this bit with Chanki had lasted over hundreds of years because neither Ananda nor the Buddha were there to tell the story.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly the point that I had in mind. You could raise the question, how would the compilers of the suttas have been privy to this conversation? They weren't there. Somebody might argue, okay, maybe Moggallana, who has the psychic powers, happened to tune his divine ear in and was listening. And then Moggallana told somebody else, because Moggallana passed away a little before the Buddha, so he wasn't present at the first council when the texts were being recited. And nothing is said about Moggallana listening in. So how was this conversation? We could say, okay, the Buddha was omniscient. He might have been listening in and told it to the monks. But I think the Buddha would have more important things to attend to than to listen to such conversations. So where did the conversation, how did it get into the text?
Unless it was mentioned at that time.
We take the microphone.
Unless it was mentioned by Chanki at that time to other people.
That Chanki would have told others, who would have told the monks.
The background.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems a little bit that strains my credulity. Excuse me?
That's what I can think of.
Yeah, but it seems.
How I came here today. I said my friend, but they can carry forward.
It's also, it's possible that Chanki might have related to somebody, something about a discussion that took place. But each of these arguments. Nothing is said anyplace else in the text about him. I don't think he reappears in any other suttas. Anyway, so this is a question that I bring up. And it seems to me that, we could see this conversation as having what I would call a strategic purpose. On the one hand, showing how trying to establish a harmonious accord between the Brahmins and the Buddhist community, because it shows that certain qualities that the Brahmins are praised for, the Buddha also possesses. Good family lineage, physical beauty, eloquence in speaking, a large following. So, and then also emphasizing that the Buddha upholds the law of karma and intends no harm for the Brahmins. So on the one hand, it's attempting to, say, placate the Brahmin community and saying, we can get along harmoniously. Don't have to worry that we're going to be, challenging you. But on the other hand, it's also showing that the Buddha, in certain respects, is superior spiritually to the Brahmins, because the Buddha has renunciation, the virtue of renunciation. He's free of sensual lust, and whereas the Brahmin Chanki is honored and respected by King Pasenadi and other high-ranking rulers of the time. The King Pasenadi and King Bimbisara, together with their families, have gone for refuge to the Buddha. Okay, so all of this is, I would say, very important, exercising a kind of strategic function in sort of balancing cordial relations with the Brahmins with a firm line of the spiritual superiority of the Buddha. Any questions or comments at this point? Please take the mobile microphone.
Okay. Even though exactly someone like Canki may not exist or historically be correct, the conversation seems very true at that time.
The what?
The conversation. The discussion seems to represent the truth, like a lot of Brahmins have complaints against the Buddhists, and perhaps one Brahmin such as Canki said the right thing. Seems historically, conceptually correct.
Yeah, that's a good point. Even though this might not be
exactly right.
An actual historical conversation, but it can be like an imaginary reconstruction of the type of conversation that would have taken place.
Yes, that's what I feel. Thank you.
Okay, I think Michael in the back. Take the microphone first.
Of course. I notice also that coming up very quickly is setting up the legitimacy of the young upstart Brahmin, and the young whose name I can't pronounce.
Yeah, his name is after you. Kapatika.
Kapatika, and it's Chunky who sets up the legitimacy of this.
That's a very good point.
Brahmin.
Yeah, that's a very good point. In fact, that seems to be the only place, once they come into the presence of the Buddha, that's the only place where Chunky, that's the only place further on in the sutta where Chunky speaks. So it seems like the whole preliminary portion of the sutta could be, as you say, for the purpose of introducing Chunky as an authoritative Brahmin, so that he will then throw the weight of his authority behind this young Brahmin student named Kapatika. Did I see somebody else have? Okay, so let us go continue then into the rest of the sutta. Okay, so now this whole, you see this whole first, the large crowd of ordinary, householder Brahmins has already gone into the Buddha's presence, and now this fairly large group, perhaps 500, we don't know, of eminent Brahmins, distinguished Brahmins, headed by Chunky, has now gone up to the north to see the Buddha. And so, after they exchanged the courteous greetings, so we read that on that occasion, the Blessed One was seated, finishing some amiable talk with some very senior Brahmins. So apparently there were already distinguished Brahmins who were up there speaking with the Buddha. And then we read, is that a telephone? Excuse me? Oh, okay. So at the time in the assembly there was a Brahmin student named Kapatika. I don't think we encounter him anyplace else, only in the sutta. But apparently at the time there must have been these young proteges, like a Mozart at the age of 5 was able to compose beautiful compositions, give concerts, at the age of 10, 11. So there were these young Brahmins who were just 16, not even, they called Manavaka, I think, a Brahmin student. But even though he was so young, he had mastered the 3 Vedas and their vocabularies and so on. So he mastered all of the branches of Brahmin learning. And so while the elder Brahmins were talking with the Buddha, this youngster was always trying to break in and interrupt their talk. And so the Buddha rebukes him. And he says, let not the venerable, the word here, venerable, it's not the same word as venerable used for a monk. I think it's more like honorable. Bharadvaja, that would be his family name, whereas Kapatika would have been his personal name. And the Bharadvajas, this was like the cream of the ultra elite amongst the Brahmins. Like, today when they speak about the U.S. economy, sometimes they speak about the 1%, and then they speak about the 1/10 of the 1%. So the Bharadvajas were like the 1/10 of the 1% amongst the Brahmins. So coming from that particular clan, he must have been Kapatika, on the one hand quite conceited, maybe even arrogant, but also he would have been exposed from infancy would have had all of the Brahmin teachings given to him. So that's why he could master them at the age of 16. So the Buddha turns to him and rebukes him and says, don't break in and interrupt us. Your elders are speaking, and just wait patiently until we finish our discussion. Okay, so when this is said, then the Brahmin Chanki appeals or makes a polite request to the Buddha and says, please, Master Gautama, don't rebuke the Brahmin student Kapatika, for he is very learned, he has a good delivery, he is wise. I don't remember whether the word used is pandita, which means wise in the sense of learning, or panyava, which means one who has real wisdom. But he's capable of taking part in this discussion. Okay, it seems that the Buddha accepts this suggestion from Chanki, and now the Brahmin student Kapatika thinks that he wants to catch the eye of the Buddha in order to ask him a question. Since perhaps the Buddha is looking at the senior Brahmins, and maybe deliberately avoiding the eye of Kapatika because he knows that this youngster is a bit of a nuisance. But Kapatika, again, how do we know that Kapatika had this thought? It seems that the compilers are introducing what we call narrative elements into this to make it more coherent. But it says Kapatika it makes it interesting also to give a little dramatic content. Yeah, please, I have to make a request to those who have, are these cell phones that make this music? Okay, so the Buddha knows the thought in the student Kapatika's mind, and now the Buddha now wants to initiate the discussion. So the Buddha deliberately turns to him, the eyes meet, and then the Brahmin student takes this as an opening, as the opportunity for opening a conversation. So now he's going to, in a sense, sort of hit on a really key point, a key concern of the Brahmins, and that is the truth, the authority of the Vedas. And so he says, Master Gautama, in regard to the ancient Brahmin hymns that have come down through oral transmission, that are preserved in the collections, the Brahmins come to the definite conclusion that only this is true. Anything else is wrong. So by the ancient Brahmin hymns, he's referring to the hymns of the Vedas, particularly probably with special emphasis on the Rig Veda, which is the oldest and the most sacred of the Vedas. So what does Master Gautama say about this? Okay, now the Buddha here has to be tactful. You know, he's surrounded by Brahmins, and this young Brahmin is asking him this kind of, call it explosive question, a potentially explosive question. So if the Buddha were to say, you know, that's just a blind belief on the part of the Brahmins, there'd be an uproar, and the Brahmins might get up angrily and all depart. So the Buddha is going to question Kappatika in a way which is going to get Kappatika to recognize the fault, so that Kappatika himself will recognize the fault, or we could say the pretentiousness, the illegitimacy of this claim of the Brahmins. And also by asking the questions in this way, the Buddha is going to open up the opportunity to present a distinction in means of knowledge, ways of knowing. In modern philosophy, we might call this the difference in epistemologies, the approaches to the acquisition of knowledge, or the difference in the approaches to acquisition of truth claims, since the truth claims might not be valid at all. So the Buddha questions Bharadvaja. He asks them, how then, among the Brahmins, is there even one Brahmin who says this about the Vedic hymns? I know this, I see this, only this is true, anything else is wrong. And Bharadvaja has to admit, no, Master Gautama. How then, Bharadvaja, among the Brahmins, is there even a single teacher or a single teacher's teacher going back through 7 generations who says, I know, I see this, only this is true, anything else is wrong? And now Bharadvaja is probably getting a little embarrassed and ashamed, since he probably sees what the Buddha is driving at. But he has to be honest in conversation, so he says, no, Master Gautama. Okay, now the Buddha takes the argument right back to the very beginning, so to speak, and he says, how then, Bharadvaja, the ancient Brahmin seers, the creators of the hymns, the composers of the hymns, the ones who in ancient times chanted, uttered, and compiled the hymns, and who sort of sent down these hymns in a line of transmission. Then he mentions the names: Attaka, Vamaka, Vamadeva, Vesamita, Yamatagi, Angirasa, Bharadvaja, Vaseta, Kassapa, and Bhagu. I believe that these would be rishis or sages who are mentioned in the Rig Veda. Did even these ancient Brahmin seers, and the word seer here is the word rishi, did they say, we know this, we see this, only this is true, anything else is wrong? I sometimes wonder what would happen if somewhere in this argument Bharadvaja were to say, well, there are Brahmins who do make this claim that this is true, anything else is wrong. But he complies with the drift of the Buddha's argument. Okay, so now the Buddha says, he sums up the points, he says, it seems then that among the Brahmins there is not even a single Brahmin who says, I know this, I see this, only this is true, anything else is wrong. And so there's not even a single teacher or a teacher's teacher back through 7 generations who could make this claim. And even the very ancient Brahmin seers who created and passed down the hymns, even they couldn't make this claim. And now the Buddha brings in a very vivid simile to illustrate the point. He says, suppose there were a file of blind men, each in touch with the next. So they're holding on. Each one is holding the hand of the one in front. And so the first one does not see, the middle one does not see, the last one does not see. And so too, in regard to their statements, the Brahmins seem to be like a file of blind men. The first one does not see, the middle one does not see, and the last one does not see. So, and now the Buddha draws out the conclusion. He says, since this is the case, doesn't the faith of the Brahmins turn out to be groundless? Oh, it's a very powerful point, since the Brahmins are in a sense staking everything on the belief, the faith that the words of the Vedas are infallible, revelations of truth. In fact, my understanding was that, or at least that this is the mainstream Hindu belief, is that the Vedas were not actually composed by human beings, or that they are not human creations, human compositions, but rather the ancient rishis were supposed to have received a kind of divine inspiration, that the truth of the Vedas were breathed into the depths of their minds, and then through the force of the divine inspiration, they composed the Vedas. Okay, but since none of them make a claim to the truth of the Vedas, to know and see for themselves that the Vedas are truth, then any kind of truth claims about the Vedas, it doesn't mean that what the Vedas say are false, but the faith that what they say is true is groundless. Any questions or any comments about this? Please go right ahead.
Okay, this is a comment. I think this is a very crucial logical statement of the Buddha.
Yeah.
Because the Brahmins, it came generations after generations. Sometimes they didn't write it purposely.
They didn't.
Write down these slokas purposely, because they wanted to control and pass it on through ears only, through memorization.
Yeah, right, yeah.
So they have done this memorization, like chanting of mantras.
Yeah.
Even now they do that.
Yeah.
But no one have the courage to tell, yes, I know this to be true. Yes, I heard it myself.
Yeah.
Then did not. That is the truth.
Yeah.
And Buddha caught them at their own mistake.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. But also we have to remember, in the Buddha's time, religious teaching, spiritual teachings were always passed on orally. There was no writing used for I mean, from the text, there seems to be no evidence that writing was used at that time. If it was used, it might have been used just if a king was issuing an edict, he would have the edict inscribed on stone, or maybe they would send messages. But in the Buddhist texts themselves, there's no mention of any text being written down. So all religious teachings were being transmitted orally at that time.
Yes, my other point is it was purposely done to control.
It was, I didn't get that word.
Purposely. It was purposely done to control, because they wanted to control the mantras, because this is their territorial power.
That I don't know about. I'm not so sure about that. Because it seems that there could have been a general conviction that
No, for example, the Gayatri mantra, the most important mantra in Hindu religion, they will only pass it on through your ears so that nobody else can hear it. Anyway, the other point is, that is why I think my knowledge is that the Buddha taught in the local language, the Pali language. That's so anybody can hear it and know it and understand it.
Yeah, the Buddha would have taught in the local language, and he wanted the text to be preserved in the local language. Though the language that we call Pali now, I mean, the general consensus of scholars is that it's something of a amalgamation of a number of dialects that were used in northern India, perhaps about 2 centuries after the passing of the Buddha, that would have been closely related to the languages that the Buddha spoke. Any further comments, questions? Okay, then I think we will stop here and then take up the rest of the sutta next week. Originally, I was intending to do the whole sutta this week, according to the schedule. So now I've started the new semester by throwing off the printed schedule at the very first class. But I thought it's rather interesting to go through that the 2 tables of arguments, or the 2 sets of arguments that are used. One, why the Buddha should come to see the brahmin Canki, and the other, why Canki's arguments, why he himself should go to see the Buddha. Okay, so we end with the sharing of the merits, and then after the lunch break, then we come back and say starting 12 o'clock, and we'll have maybe about 30 minutes discussion. So everybody has the sheet for the sharing of the merits. Okay, so we're sharing the merits with the Dhamma protecting devas, the nagas or dragon spirits, the bhutas, the fierce spirits, and with all beings, requesting them to protect the Buddha Sasana, to protect the exposition of the teaching, to protect the world, and to, by rejoicing, to achieve all of their good purposes. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanu modantu sabba sampati siddhya bhavagupadaya avichihetato etantare satakayupapanna rupiya rupicha asanya sanino dukkha pamochantu pusantu nibuting. Okay, we stand up. And we end with 3 short bows to the Buddha.